Moonbound and Marked. Evan Corbin had spent her life ignoring the whispers that called her to the forest, the pull of something she could not name. But when the blood moon rose and the wind carried her name, she felt the shift, the change, the bond snapping into place. The air thickened. The world stilled. And then he stepped forward from the darkness, golden-eyed and waiting. "You were never meant to escape this," he murmured. "And I was never meant to let you go." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Blackwood Creek. The air in Blackwood Creek always held a certain stillness, a pregnant hush that felt older than the towering pines guarding its borders. Evan Corbin had lived with that hush her entire life, a constant, low thrum beneath the everyday noises of her quiet existence. At 58, she was a woman carved by routine and loss, her days a gentle cycle of tending her small bookstore, bound pages, and retreating to the solitude of her Victorian cottage on the edge of town. The cottage, inherited from her grandmother, was a repository of memories, each room filled with the scent of aged paper and lavender, a comfort and a cage. Her hair, once of vibrant auburn, was now streaked with silver, mirroring the frosted window panes on a winter morning. Her eyes, a deep, contemplative hazel, held a weariness that belied a lingering spark, a refusal to be completely extinguished. She'd worn sensible shoes and cardigans for so long that the silk scarves her grandmother had favored, tucked away in a cedar chest, felt like relics of a forgotten life, a life of vibrant color and whispered possibilities. The whispers, though, were the constant. They weren't audible voices, not exactly. More like a feeling, a persistent tugging at the edges of her awareness, a sense of something vast and unknown lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. It always intensified in the woods, particularly the sprawling, ancient Blackwood forest that bordered the town. As a child, she'd been drawn to it, spending hours amongst the trees, feeling both terrified and strangely at home. Her grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and unsettling knowledge, had warned her away. "The woods hold secrets, Evan, she'd said, her voice low and laced with an uncharacteristic tremor. Secrets best left undisturbed. Evan had heeded the warning, mostly. The fear, instilled early, had kept her on the well-trodden paths, her explorations limited to the occasional sanctioned hike. But the whispers persisted, growing stronger with each passing year, particularly around the time of the full moon. It was a restlessness, a yearning for something she couldn't name, a feeling of being incomplete. Her husband, Thomas, had been a grounding force, a steady presence who had anchored her to the mundane. He'd been a carpenter, his hands rough but gentle, his laughter a warm, comforting sound that had filled the echoing spaces of the old house. But a sudden illness, swift and merciless, had taken him 5 years ago, leaving Evan adrift in a sea of grief. The bookstore, a shared dream, had become her refuge, the familiar scent of old books a balm to her wounded soul. The town itself was a character in her life, a tapestry woven with familiar faces and predictable routines. There was Mrs. Hawthorne, the perpetually gossiping owner of the bakery, whose cinnamon rolls were legendary. There was young Emily, who worked part-time at the library and harbored a secret crush on the town's quiet, enigmatic mechanic, Liam. And there was Sheriff Brody, a man of few words and unwavering dedication, who had known Evan since she was a girl. Blackwood Creek was a place where time seemed to slow, where change came reluctantly, if at all. But lately, the air had shifted. The usual stillness felt different. Charged. The whispers were more insistent, almost demanding. And a new unease had settled over the town, a subtle tension that even the placid surface of Blackwood Creek couldn't conceal. People spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences in the woods, unsettling sounds, odd lights, a feeling of being watched. Sheriff Brody, usually unflappable, had a furrow in his brow that seemed permanently etched. Evan, despite her inherent caution, found herself increasingly drawn to the woods. The pull was almost physical, a magnetic force she couldn't resist. She started taking longer walks, venturing closer to the forbidden depths, the whispers now a constant companion, a siren song luring her toward an unknown destiny. She began to have vivid dreams, filled with fleeting images of shadowed figures, golden eyes, and the overwhelming scent of pine and earth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Evan found herself standing at the edge of the woods, the air thick with anticipation. The scent of pine was intoxicating, mingled with something else, something wild and untamed. The whispers were a chorus now, a symphony of longing and fear. She took a step forward, then another, her heart pounding in her chest. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches forming a dark, welcoming archway. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it was dangerous. But the pull was too strong, the whispers too insistent. As she stepped into the shadows, a single ray of moonlight pierced through the canopy, illuminating a silver ring on her left hand, a ring she hadn't worn in years, a ring Thomas had given her, a ring that suddenly felt warm, almost alive, against her skin. It was the ring he'd proposed with, saying it was an old family heirloom, that the silver crescent moon design had been passed down for generations. He said it chose its wearer. Tonight it felt like it was humming. She didn't know how long she walked, lost in the labyrinth of trees and shadows. The air grew colder, the moonlight filtering through the leaves in dappled patterns. A sense of unease began to creep in, a primal fear that tightened her chest. She turned to go back, but the path she thought she'd taken had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable wall of trees. Panic flared, cold and sharp. She was lost. And she wasn't alone. A low growl, deep and resonant, echoed through the stillness. She froze, her blood turning to ice. Something was watching her. Something close. Something other. Chapter 2. A Blood Moon's Awakening. The growl resonated through the trees again, closer this time, a vibration that Evan felt in her bones. It wasn't the sound of any animal she knew, too deep, too knowing. Her breath hitched in her throat, fear a cold knot in her stomach. She strained her eyes, trying to pierce the gloom, but the shadows seemed to dance and shift, concealing whatever lurked within. The moon, a swollen, crimson orb hanging low in the sky, cast an eerie, blood-red glow over the forest. It was a sight Evan had only ever witnessed in old, Gothic novels, a visual manifestation of the unsettling whispers that had plagued her for so long. The silver ring on her finger pulsed with a warmth that was now almost burning, a tangible connection to something ancient and powerful. Suddenly, the air thickened, the silence before the growl pressing down on her like a physical weight. The scent of pine intensified, overlaid with a musky, animalistic odor that made her stomach churn. Then, a rustling in the undergrowth, the snapping of twigs, and he stepped into a pool of blood-red moonlight. He was tall, impossibly so, his silhouette a dark, imposing presence against the backdrop of the trees. He moved with a fluid grace, an animalistic power that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. As he drew closer, the details emerged from the shadows. His hair was the color of midnight, falling in thick waves around a face that was both rugged and strikingly handsome. His features were sharp, almost severe, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were gold, a luminous, molten gold that seemed to glow with an inner light, a predator's gaze that pierced through her defenses. He was dressed in dark clothing, clothes that seemed to mold to his powerful frame, accentuating the breadth of his shoulders and the lean lines of his body. A leather jacket, worn and supple, hinted at a life lived on the edge, a life far removed from the quiet predictability of Blackwood Creek. There was a raw, untamed energy about him, a sense of danger that sent shivers down her spine. But beneath the danger, there was something else, something that resonated deep within her, a flicker of recognition, a feeling of inevitability. He stopped a few feet away, his golden eyes fixed on her, assessing, probing. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the frantic beating of her heart. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that was both curious and predatory. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a palpable energy that hummed between them. Evan the Corbin, he finally spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to echo the earlier growl. It was a voice that sent shivers down her spine, a voice that spoke of ancient forests and moonlit hunts. It was a voice that knew her, that claimed her. She swallowed, her throat dry. Who are you? She managed to whisper, her voice trembling. A faint smile touched his lips, a curve that was both captivating and dangerous. You know who I am, he said, his voice laced with a certainty that defied logic. You've felt it, haven't you? The pull, the whispers, the bond. The word bond struck her like a physical blow. It was a word that resonated with the dreams, the whispers, the growing sense of unease that had consumed her. It was a word that spoke of a connection she couldn't understand, a connection that terrified and intrigued her in equal measure. I don't understand, she stammered, her mind reeling. He took a step closer, his golden eyes never leaving hers. The scent of him, pine and musk and something indefinably wild, filled her senses, overwhelming her. You will, he said softly. The blood moon awakens what was dormant. It reveals what was hidden. It binds what was destined. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and strong, the nails slightly elongated, hinting at something not quite human. She flinched, instinctively recoiling from his touch. He paused, his hand hovering in the air between them, his golden eyes darkening with a flicker of something that might have been hurt, or perhaps regret. Don't be afraid, he said, his voice losing some of its edge, replaced by a surprising gentleness. I won't hurt you. Not unless you force me to. The last part of his sentence sent a renewed wave of fear through her. But beneath the fear, a strange sense of curiosity, of longing, began to stir. She looked at his outstretched hand, at the strength and the vulnerability it represented. She looked at his eyes, at the ancient knowledge and the hidden pain they held. The blood moon bathed them in its crimson light, casting long, dancing shadows that intertwined and separated. The silver ring on her finger pulsed again, an insistent rhythm that echoed the beat of her heart. She remembered Thomas's words, it chooses its wearer. A feeling, a certainty she hadn't known before, sparked within. She needed to trust this feeling. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out her own hand, her fingers trembling as they brushed against his. A jolt of energy, like a lightning strike, surged through her, a connection that was both shocking and exhilarating. His skin was warm, surprisingly so, and the touch sent a wave of heat through her entire body. It was a connection not just physical, but something deeper, something that resonated in the very core of her being. A moan escaped her lips, one of shock, and one that held the barest hint of pleasure. He closed his hand around hers, his grip firm but gentle, a silent vow. His golden eyes, now softer, held a look of relief. And something else, something that made her heart ache with a longing she hadn't felt in years. You were never meant to escape this, he murmured, his voice a low thrum against the backdrop of the whispering wind. And I was never meant to let you go. He pulled her gently closer. The world seemed to shrink, to narrow, until it was just the two of them. The red moon, the dark forest, his gold eyes. Chapter 3. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. The world tilted. Not in a dizzying, uncontrolled way, but as if the axis of her very existence had shifted, realigning itself with this man, this creature, who held her hand in the blood-red moonlight. He drew her closer, and she went willingly, her fear battling with an undeniable pull, a magnetic force that seemed to emanate from him. He didn't lead her back towards the town, but deeper into the woods, along a path that seemed to appear and disappear with each step, as if woven from the shadows themselves. The trees, their branches gnarled and ancient, formed a silent, watchful audience. The air grew colder, yet she felt a warmth radiating from him, a comforting heat that seeped into her chilled bones. Who are you? She asked again, her voice steadier this time, her initial terror giving way to a bewildered curiosity. He glanced down at her, his golden eyes flickering in the moonlight. My name is Reese, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the rustling leaves. Rhys Llewellyn. The name was unfamiliar, yet it stirred something within her, a faint echo of a forgotten memory, a whisper from a dream. It sounded ancient, powerful like him. "And what are you?" she pressed, the question a breath of fear and fascination. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. The silence stretched, filled only by the sounds of the forest, the hooting of an owl, the rustling of unseen creatures, the whisper of the wind through the trees. It was a silence that held a weight, a sense of secrets waiting to be revealed. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her fully. He released her hand, and she felt a pang of loss, a sudden absence of the warmth and connection that had flowed between them. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch surprisingly gentle, his thumbs brushing lightly against the delicate skin of her throat. It was a possessive gesture, a claiming, yet it didn't feel threatening. "You know what I am, Evan," he said, his voice low and intense, his golden eyes locking with hers. "Deep down, you've always known. You've just been afraid to admit it." She stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the reality of the situation with the years of carefully constructed normalcy she had built around herself. The whispers, the dreams, the pull of the woods, the silver ring, it all pointed to something beyond the realm of the ordinary, something she had always sensed but never dared to acknowledge. "Werewolf," she whispered, the word a fragile confession, a terrifying truth. A flicker of something that might have been amusement, or perhaps relief, crossed his face. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver down her spine. "And you, Evan, are my mate." The word mate struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was a word that belonged in romance novels, in folklore, in the realm of fantasy. Yet, coming from him, in this moonlit forest, it felt undeniably real, undeniably binding. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. I'm an ordinary woman. I run a bookstore. I am not. You are far from ordinary, Evan, he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. You are one of us. You always have been. Your bloodline is ancient, tied to this land, to this pack for centuries. He began to explain, his words weaving a tapestry of ancient lore and forgotten history. He spoke of a lineage of women, strong and independent, who had carried the mark of the wolf, a connection to the primal forces of nature. He spoke of soul bonds, forged in the crucible of the blood moon, unbreakable ties that transcended time and space. He spoke of a curse, a shadow that had hung over his pack for generations, a darkness that threatened to consume them all. He spoke of her grandmother, Alara, and the stories she never told. Alara, it seemed, was far more than the quiet, eccentric woman Evan remembered. She was a guardian, a protector of the ancient ways, a woman who had known the truth about Avant's heritage and had tried to shield her from it. Your grandmother knew, Rhys said, his voice laced with a hint of sadness. She tried to keep you safe, to keep you away from this life. But the bond, it's too strong. It cannot be denied. Evan remembered her grandmother's warnings, her cryptic words about the secrets of the woods. She remembered the fear in her eyes, the way she had always discouraged Evan from venturing too deep into the forest. It all made sense now, a terrifying, exhilarating sense. But why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why now? The blood moon, Rhys said, gesturing to the crimson orb hanging above them. It's a catalyst. It awakens the dormant power, strengthens the bond. And there's something else. Something is stirring in the darkness, something that threatens us all. You are the key, Evan. You are the one who can help us fight it. His words were both terrifying and exhilarating. She, an ordinary woman, the key to fighting some unknown darkness? It seemed impossible, preposterous. Yet, looking into his golden eyes, feeling the pull of the bond, the undeniable connection that flowed between them, she knew it was true. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, a gesture of tenderness that sent a wave of warmth through her. I know this is a lot to take in, he said softly, but you are not alone. I will be here to guide you, to protect you, to help you understand. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. Trust me, he whispered. Trust the bond. Trust us. He left the woods in the opposite direction from town, his body a lithe silhouette. The air was cooler, the moon less red, and the forest had returned to silence. Chapter 4. The Scent of Pine and Wolf. The walk back to her cottage felt surreal. The woods, which had seemed menacing and alive just moments before, were now quiet, almost ordinary. The blood moon had faded to a pale, milky white, its crimson intensity gone. Yet nothing felt ordinary. Yvan's world had been irrevocably altered, her reality shattered and reformed in the span of a few hours. The scent of Reese lingered on her clothes, in her hair, a potent mix of pine and musk and something indefinably him. It was a scent that both terrified and comforted her, a constant reminder of the encounter, of the bond, of the life that now stretched before her, a life far removed from the quiet predictability she had known. She reached the cottage, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the key. The familiar sight of the porch swing, the overgrown rose bushes, the flickering gas lamp by the door, usually a source of comfort, now seemed alien, belonging to a different life, a life she was no longer sure she inhabited. Inside, the house was silent, filled with the familiar scent of old books and lavender. But even that comfort couldn't dispel the unease that churned within her. She went through the motions of her nightly routine, locking the doors, checking the windows, brewing a cup of chamomile tea, but her mind was racing, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. She sat in her grandmother's old rocking chair, the silver ring on her finger heavy and warm. She remembered the stories Thomas had told her about the ring, about its history, about how it was said to choose its wearer. She hadn't paid much attention then, dismissing them as romantic fancies. But now she closed her eyes, replaying the encounter with Reese in her mind. His words, his touch, his golden eyes, the bond. The word echoed in her thoughts, a constant, insistent hum. Mate. The concept was both terrifying and exhilarating. To be bound to someone, to something, so completely, so irrevocably, it was a concept that challenged everything she believed about love, about choice, about free will. She thought of Thomas, her late husband, the gentle, steady love they had shared. A pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her. Was she betraying him by even considering this bond with Reese? Was she dishonoring his memory? But another part of her, a part she had suppressed for years, a part that yearned for something more, for something wild and untamed, argued back. Thomas was gone, and she was still alive. And something extraordinary, something terrifying and wonderful, had awakened within her. She opened her eyes, looking around the familiar room, at the shelves lined with books, at the photographs on the mantelpiece, at the faded floral wallpaper. It was a room filled with memories, with the ghosts of her past. But it was also a room that felt empty. She had been living in the past, clinging to memories, afraid to embrace the present, let alone the future. Reese had said she was the key, that she could help fight some unknown darkness. The thought was daunting, overwhelming. She was a bookseller, not a warrior. She was a widow, not a mate. Yet, beneath the fear, a flicker of excitement, of purpose, began to stir. She had spent so long feeling lost, adrift, that the prospect of having a purpose, of being needed, of being part of something bigger than herself, was intriguing. She finished her tea, the warmth spreading through her, a small comfort in the face of the overwhelming uncertainty. She went upstairs, to her bedroom, the room she had shared with Thomas. She changed into her nightgown, the soft cotton a familiar comfort against her skin. But as she slipped into bed, the scent of Reese, still clinging to her, filled her senses, disrupting the familiar routine. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought of Reese's words, his explanation of her lineage, of the soul bond, of the curse. It all sounded like something out of a fantasy novel, yet she couldn't deny the reality of what she had experienced, the undeniable connection she had felt with him. She drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of golden eyes, shadowed forests, and the overwhelming scent of pine and wolf. She dreamed of running, not in fear, but in exhilaration, her body moving with a newfound strength and agility. She dreamed of Rhys, his hand in hers, his voice a low, reassuring murmur in her ear. When she woke, the morning light filtering through the curtains, she felt different. The fear was still there, but it was mingled with a sense of anticipation, of excitement, of a life about to begin, a life she had never imagined. The silver ring on her finger felt warm, a constant reminder of the bond, of Rhys, of the path that now lay before her. As she rose and prepared for her day, a part of her mind returned to her responsibilities. The bookstore would need to open, and she was already running late. She knew that in the midst of this internal turmoil, a part of her needed to seek that normalcy. She looked at the phone, debating whether to call Sheriff Brody. Should she report what happened? Would he even believe her? A werewolf? A soul bond? It seemed absurd. She gazed through her reflection in the mirror. The woman that looked back seemed different, haunted, but awake. She decided, at least for now, to keep it to herself. But the feeling of his touch, the sound of his voice, and the weight of their bond were decisions she knew she couldn't ignore. She opened the bookstore as the town began to stir. But every creak of the door, every customer inquiry, it all felt wrong, as if she did not fully belong here. Chapter 5. The Mark of the Silver Crescent. The day at the bookstore passed in a blur. Evan went through the motions, shelving books, assisting customers, making small talk, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in the tangled web of werewolves, soul bonds, and ancient curses. Every so often, she'd catch a whiff of pine and musk, a phantom scent that brought Rhys vividly back to her, a reminder of the night before and the life-altering encounter. She tried to focus on the familiar comfort of the books, on the quiet hum of the store, on the predictable routine of her day. But it was no use. The ordinary had been shattered, replaced by something extraordinary, something terrifying and exhilarating. Mrs. Hawthorne, the bakery owner, stopped by for her usual mid-morning chat, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "You seem a bit distracted today, Evan," she said, her voice laced with her usual blend of concern and nosiness. "Anything the matter?" Evan forced a smile. "Just a bit tired, Mrs. Hawthorne," she lied.
"Didn't sleep well."
Mrs. Hawthorne said, unconvinced. "Well, they say a good cinnamon roll cures everything. I brought you an extra one, fresh from the oven." Evan accepted the offering, grateful for the small gesture of kindness. But even the delicious aroma of the cinnamon roll couldn't fully penetrate the fog of confusion and anticipation that enveloped her. As the day wore on, she found herself increasingly restless, her gaze constantly drawn to the window, to the distant line of trees that marked the edge of Blackwood Forest. She felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing her back to the woods, back to Rhys. It was a feeling she couldn't ignore, a primal urge that defied logic and reason. She closed the bookstore early, an unusual occurrence that would undoubtedly fuel the town's gossip mill. But she couldn't stay there any longer, trapped within the confines of her old life, a life that no longer felt like her own. She returned to the cottage, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn. She changed out of her sensible clothes and into something more practical. Jeans, a sturdy sweater, hiking boots. Clothes that were more suited to the woods, to the life that now beckoned her. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the phone. Should she call Rhys? She didn't even know how to contact him. He hadn't given her a number, a way to reach him. He had simply appeared and then disappeared, leaving her with a shattered reality and a soul bond she didn't understand. But the pull was too strong, the need to see him, to understand what was happening, overwhelming. She grabbed her grandmother's old walking stick, a sturdy piece of oak that felt reassuringly solid in her hand, and stepped out into the twilight. She walked towards the woods, her pace quickening with each step. The air grew cooler, the scent of pine intensifying, mingled with the musky, animalistic scent of Rhys. It was a scent that both thrilled and terrified her, a scent that spoke of wildness and danger, of a connection that transcended the ordinary. As she entered the woods, the trees seemed to welcome her, their branches forming a dark, protective canopy overhead. The whispers, which had been a constant background hum for years, were now louder, clearer, guiding her deeper into the forest. She followed a path, or what seemed like a path, her senses heightened, alert to every sound, every movement. The forest was alive, filled with the rustling of unseen creatures, the hooting of owls, the whisper of the wind through the leaves. It was a world she had always sensed but never fully embraced, a world that now felt both familiar and terrifyingly new. Suddenly, she heard a sound, a soft, almost inaudible whimper. She stopped, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time. She followed the sound, pushing through a thicket of bushes, and found herself in a small clearing, bathed in the soft glow of the rising moon. And there he was, Reese. But he wasn't himself. He was on the ground, his body curled in on itself, his breathing ragged and shallow. He was shirtless, his powerful torso covered in sweat, his skin pale and clammy. And there, on his shoulder, was a mark, a raw, angry wound that glowed with an unnatural, silver light. It was the shape of a crescent moon, a mirror image of the design on her ring. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Reese," she cried, her voice filled with fear and concern. "What happened?" He groaned, his eyes flickering open. They were still gold, but they were clouded with pain, their usual intensity dimmed. He looked at her, a flicker of recognition, of relief, crossing his face. "Evan," he whispered, his voice weak and strained. "You came." "Of course I came," she said, her voice trembling. "What is this? What happened to you?" He tried to sit up, but a sharp intake of breath, a grimace of pain, stopped him. "Hunters," he managed to say, his voice a ragged whisper. "Silver, it burns silver." The words struck her like a physical blow. She remembered the stories, the folklore, the legends about werewolves, and their vulnerability to silver. It was all true. It was all terrifyingly real. She looked at the wound, at the raw, angry flesh, at the unnatural glow. It was a mark of pain, of vulnerability, of a curse that had now touched her life, her world. "We need to get you out of here," she said, her voice firm with a newfound determination. "We need to get you to safety." He shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and resignation. "It's too late," he whispered. "The curse, it's taking hold." His body began to tremble, his muscles spasming. He was fighting and he was losing. As his eyes lost focus, and the scent of pine was overpowered by something else, something burning, Evan knew she had mere moments before something else happened. Before it was too late. Chapter 6. Shadows of Doubt and Desire. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, a palpable tension that made the hairs on Avant's arms stand on end. Reese's body continued to convulse, his muscles rippling and spasming beneath his skin. The silver crescent wound on his shoulder pulsed with a sickly, greenish light, the flesh around it raw and inflamed. He was losing the battle against the silver's poison, against the curse that plagued his kind. Avant's mind raced, a frantic scramble for solutions. She knew nothing about treating werewolf wounds, about combating ancient curses. She was a bookseller, not a healer, not a warrior. But she was also his mate, bound to him by a force she didn't understand but couldn't deny. She had to do something. She remembered her grandmother's cottage, the attic filled with old books, with forgotten remedies, with whispers of ancient knowledge. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only option she had. "Reese," she said, her voice urgent, desperate. "I need to get you to my grandmother's cottage. There might be something there, something that can help." He groaned, his eyes flickering open, their golden glow dimmed by pain. "No, too dangerous," he whispered, his voice weak and strained. "Hunters, they'll be back, I don't care," she said, her voice firm with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. I'm not leaving you here. She tried to lift him, but he was too heavy, his body a dead weight. She struggled, her muscles straining, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't do it alone. She looked around, desperate for help, for any sign of anything. The forest was silent, watchful, offering no assistance. The moon, a pale, indifferent orb, cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock her efforts. Then she remembered the bond, the connection she had felt with Reese, the surge of energy that had flowed between them when their hands had touched. It was a long shot, a desperate, intuitive leap, but she had nothing to lose. She knelt beside him, placing her hands on his chest, directly over his heart. She closed her eyes, focusing all her energy, all her will, on the bond, on the connection, on the need to help him. She whispered his name, over and over again, a mantra of hope and desperation. Reese, 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 she felt it then, a faint flicker of warmth, a subtle tingling sensation that spread through her hands, into his body. It was a weak, fragile connection, but it was there. She focused on it, nurturing it, willing it to grow stronger. Slowly, gradually, she felt his body begin to respond. His breathing became less ragged, his muscles less tense. The silver crescent wound still pulsed with that unnatural light, but it seemed less intense. She opened her eyes, looking at him. His eyes were still closed, but his face was less contorted with pain. He was still weak, vulnerable, but he was alive. She didn't know how long she could maintain the connection, how long she could hold back the curse. But she knew she had bought him some time, some precious, fleeting moments. Reese, she said, her voice soft but firm. I need you to help me. I need you to shift. Shift. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning, with the implication of something primal, something terrifying and wonderful. She was asking him to embrace his wolf form, to transform into the creature she had only glimpsed in dreams, in nightmares. He groaned, his eyes flickering open. Can't control it, he whispered, his voice strained. Silver weakens me, you have to, she said, her voice pleading. It's the only way. I can't carry you. You have to shift. She felt a flicker of doubt, a wave of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. What if he couldn't control it? What if he attacked her? What if the wolf took over completely? But beneath the fear, there was a deeper instinct, a trust that went beyond logic, beyond reason. She trusted the bond, the connection she felt with him, the undeniable pull that had brought them together. She looked into his eyes, his golden eyes, and saw not a monster, but a man in pain, a man struggling to survive. She saw a vulnerability that mirrored her own, a shared fear, a shared hope. Trust me, Reese, she whispered, her voice filled with a conviction she didn't quite feel. Trust the bond. Trust us. He stared at her, his eyes searching hers, his gaze intense and questioning. Then, slowly, a flicker of understanding, of acceptance, crossed his face. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, his body trembling. She felt it then, a surge of power, a raw, primal energy that emanated from him, filling the clearing with an almost visible force. The air crackled, the ground vibrated, the trees seemed to lean in, watching, waiting. His body began to change, to transform, in a way that defied logic, that challenged everything she believed about the natural world. Bones shifted, muscles rippled, sprouted, his human form giving way to something wild, something untamed, something magnificent. It was a terrifying, awe-inspiring sight, a transformation that both horrified and fascinated her. The man she had known, the man she was bound to, was disappearing, replaced by a creature of myth, of legend, of nightmare. And then, standing before her, was the wolf. Huge, powerful, its fur the color of midnight, its eyes a luminous, molten gold that glowed with an inner light. It was a creature of immense power, of primal beauty, of terrifying grace. The wolf lowered its head, its golden eyes meeting hers. It was a gaze that held not menace, but recognition. It was Reese. The relief she felt was nearly overwhelming. She'd asked him to undertake a tremendous risk. He nudged her gently with his snout, a silent communication, a reassurance. Then, he lowered himself to the ground, his massive body a silent invitation. She understood. She placed her hand on his fur, feeling the coarse, thick texture, the warmth that radiated from him. It was a surreal, unbelievable moment, a moment that would forever be etched in her memory. She climbed onto his back, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands gripping his fur. It was a leap of faith, a surrender to the unknown, a trust in the bond that connected them. She didn't know when the hunters might return, or what they would find, but he nudged her again, almost reassuringly. Then, with the cottage in mind and with her holding on for dear life, he ran. Chapter 7. The Ancient Laws of the Pack. The wolf's run was a blur of motion, a symphony of speed and power. Evan clung to his fur, her body pressed against his, the wind whipping through her hair, the forest a rushing stream of greens and browns. It was terrifying, exhilarating, a visceral experience that stripped away all pretense, all artifice, leaving only the raw, primal connection between woman and wolf. She felt his muscles bunch and release beneath her, the powerful rhythm of his stride, the effortless grace with which he navigated the tangled undergrowth. She felt his heartbeat, strong and steady, a reassuring counterpoint to her own frantic pulse. She felt the bond, a vibrant, pulsing energy that flowed between them, a connection that transcended the physical, that reached into the very core of her being. They reached the cottage in a matter of minutes, a journey that would have taken her hours on foot. The wolf slowed as they approached, his pace becoming more cautious, his senses alert to any sign of danger. He circled the cottage, sniffing the air, his golden eyes scanning the shadows, ensuring their safety. He stopped by the back door, lowering himself to the ground, a silent invitation for her to dismount. Evan slid off his back, her legs shaky, her body trembling from the adrenaline surge. She stood for a moment, gazing at the wolf, at the magnificent creature that was Reese, her mind struggling to reconcile the reality of the situation with the years of normalcy she had known. He nudged her again, gently, his golden eyes urging her forward. She understood. She fumbled with the key, unlocking the back door, her hands still trembling. She pushed the door open, stepping into the familiar warmth of the kitchen, the scent of old wood and lavender a welcome contrast to the wild, untamed scent of the wolf. He followed her inside, his massive frame filling the small space, his presence both comforting and unsettling. He stood there, watching her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and trust. She led him through the house, to the living room, where a fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm, inviting glow. She gestured towards the rug in front of the fire, a thick, plush expanse of wool. "Lie down," she said, her voice soft but firm.
Rest.
He obeyed, his massive body sinking onto the rug, his head resting on his paws. He closed his eyes, his breathing becoming slower, deeper, more relaxed. He was still the wolf, but he was also Reese, the man she was bound to, the man she was beginning to care for. She knelt beside him, stroking his fur, her fingers tracing the contours of his powerful muscles. She felt a surge of tenderness, of protectiveness, towards this creature, this man, who had entrusted his life to her. She knew she had to find something in her grandmother's attic, something that could help him, something that could counteract the silver poison that was still coursing through his veins. She rose, her legs still shaky, and headed towards the stairs, her mind already racing through the possibilities, through the fragments of knowledge she had gleaned from her grandmother's old books. As she climbed the stairs, she heard a low growl, a sound of warning. She turned, looking back at the wolf. He was on his feet, his body tense, his golden eyes fixed on the front door. He was alert, sensing danger. Someone was there. The hunters? Or something else? She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trapped between the wolf and the unknown threat at the door. A sharp knock echoed through the house, followed by a voice she recognized. Evan? It's Sheriff Brody. Are you alright? Sheriff Brody. Relief, mixed with apprehension, washed over her. She knew him, trusted him, yet she couldn't explain the wolf, the bond, the ancient curse. She couldn't reveal the truth, not yet. She glanced at Reese, at the wolf, his golden eyes narrowed, his body poised to attack. She had to do something, had to defuse the situation before it escalated. Reese, she whispered, her voice urgent.
Hide.
Upstairs. In the bedroom.
Please.
He hesitated, his gaze shifting between her and the door, his instincts warring with her plea. He growled again, a low, rumbling sound of protest. Trust me, she said, her voice pleading.
Please.
I can handle this. He stared at her, his golden eyes searching hers, his gaze intense and questioning. Then slowly he relented. He turned, his massive body moving with surprising grace, and headed towards the stairs, disappearing into the shadows of the upper floor. Evan took a deep breath, composing herself, trying to erase the fear and uncertainty from her face. She walked to the front door, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. She opened the door, forcing a smile, trying to appear calm, normal. Sheriff Brody stood on the porch, his face etched with concern, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. Evan, he said, his voice relieved but cautious. Are you all right? We heard reports. Strange noises. In the woods. I'm fine, Sheriff, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Just a bit shaken. I went for a walk, got lost. It was dark. He looked at her, his eyes narrowed, his gaze probing. He didn't believe her, not entirely. He knew something was amiss, something was off. You sure you're all right? He pressed. You seem different. Just tired, Sheriff, she said, forcing another smile. It's been a long day. He hesitated, his gaze lingering on her, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. But he couldn't put his finger on it, couldn't articulate the unease he felt. All right, he said finally, reluctantly. But if you need anything, you call me. Understand? I will, Sheriff, she said.
Thank you.
He nodded, turning to leave, his footsteps heavy on the porch steps. Evan watched him go, her heart still pounding in her chest. She closed the door, locking it securely, her body leaning against it for support. She had bought herself some time, some precious, fleeting moments. But she knew it wouldn't be long before the truth came out, before the secrets of Blackwood Creek and her own hidden heritage were revealed. And she would have to confront the ancient laws of the pack, which had always been in the shadows and were, she knew, about to take center stage. The sheriff's truck pulled away, his taillights disappearing down the road. Only then did she close her eyes and let out a breath. Chapter 8. A dance of defiance and surrender. Evan waited until Sheriff Brody's truck was long gone before she dared to move. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the faint, rhythmic breathing of the wolf upstairs. She felt a strange mix of relief and trepidation, a precarious balance between safety and impending danger. She climbed the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She found Reese in the bedroom, lying on the rug by the window, his massive form bathed in the soft moonlight. He was still the wolf, but his breathing was more even, his body less tense. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a question, a silent plea for reassurance. He's gone, she said softly, kneeling beside him, stroking his fur. For now. He nudged her hand with his snout, a gesture of gratitude, of affection. She felt a surge of warmth, a connection that transcended the species barrier, the human-wolf divide. She knew she had to hurry. The silver poison was still working its way through his system, weakening him, making him vulnerable. She had to find something in her grandmother's attic, something that could counteract the effects, something that could save him. She left him there, resting, and headed towards the attic door, a narrow, unassuming entrance tucked away at the end of the hallway. The attic was a repository of forgotten memories, a place where her grandmother had stored the remnants of a life Evan had only glimpsed in fragments, in whispers, in cryptic warnings. She climbed the narrow, creaking stairs, the air growing colder, dustier, filled with the scent of aged wood and dried herbs. The attic was dimly lit, a single bare bulb casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of her vision. It was a place of secrets, of hidden knowledge, of a past that was now colliding with her present. The attic was crammed with boxes, trunks, furniture draped in dust sheets, a chaotic jumble of forgotten belongings. She remembered exploring this space as a child, fascinated by the strange objects, the whispered stories, the sense of mystery that permeated the air. But her grandmother had always warned her away from certain boxes, certain books, certain secrets. She began her search, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands trembling as she sifted through the dusty relics of her grandmother's life. She found old journals, filled with her grandmother's elegant script, chronicling her days, her thoughts, her secrets. She found books on herbs, on folklore, on ancient rituals, on werewolves. She found a small, wooden box, intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize, but which felt strangely familiar. She opened it, her hands shaking, and found a collection of vials, filled with dried herbs, strange powders, and shimmering liquids. She found a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and brittle, its title written in a language she didn't understand, but which resonated with a power that made her skin tingle. She flipped through the book, her eyes scanning the strange symbols, the cryptic diagrams, the faded illustrations. She found a page with a drawing of a crescent moon, a mirror image of the mark on Reese's shoulder, the mark on her ring. Beneath the drawing, there was a passage, written in her grandmother's hand, in English. The silver's bane, the wolf's salvation. Moonflower, nightshade, blood of the bonded. A poultice made, under the moon's gaze, to draw the poison, to heal the wound. Moonflower,
Nightshade.
blood of the bonded. She understood. It was a recipe, a remedy, a way to counteract the silver poison. She had the moonflower and nightshade growing in her garden, remnants of her grandmother's herb garden. But the blood of the bonded, that was the problem. She was the bonded. She was Reese's mate. Her blood was the key. She hesitated, her mind reeling. It was a terrifying prospect to willingly draw her own blood, to offer it as part of a ritual she didn't understand. But she looked at the book, at her grandmother's handwriting, at the drawing of the crescent moon. She thought of Reese, lying downstairs, weakened, vulnerable, his life hanging in the balance. She made her decision. She found a small, silver knife in the box, its blade sharp and gleaming. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, her hand trembling as she held the knife to her arm. It was a small prick, a tiny incision, but the blood welled up quickly, a bright crimson droplet that glistened in the dim light. She collected the blood in a small vial, her hand shaking, her heart pounding. She had the ingredients. Now, she had to follow the instructions, had to perform the ritual, had to trust. She went back downstairs, to the bedroom, where Reese still lay, his breathing shallow, his body trembling. She knelt beside him, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and determination. She mixed the ingredients, the moonflower, the nightshade, her blood, in a small bowl, following the instructions in the book. She created a poultice, a thick, dark paste that smelled of herbs and something else, something primal, something magical. She gently applied the poultice to Reese's wound, her fingers tracing the contours of the silver crescent, the raw, inflamed flesh. He flinched, a low growl rumbling in his chest, but he didn't resist. He trusted her. She sat there, watching him, waiting, praying. The moon climbed higher in the sky, its pale light streaming through the window, bathing the room in a soft, ethereal glow. The silence was broken only by the sound of their breathing, by the crackling of the fire downstairs, by the faint, rhythmic pulsing of the bond that connected them. It was a dance of defiance and surrender. Defiance against the curse, against the hunters, against the forces that threatened to tear them apart. Surrender to the bond, to the love, to the destiny that had brought them together. He began to shake. Not the shivers from before, but a new internal quake. The poultice she made had begun to steam. Chapter 9. The Hunter's Snare. The steaming poultice seemed to writhe and bubble on Reese's wound, the silver crescent mark beneath it glowing with an even more intense, almost pulsating light. Evan watched, her breath held captive in her chest, a mixture of fear and hope churning within her. She had followed her grandmother's instructions, performed the ancient ritual, but she had no idea if it would work, if it would be enough to counteract the silver poison, to save him. Reese's body continued to tremble, his muscles contracting and relaxing in rhythmic spasms. He whimpered, a low, guttural sound that tore at her heart. She stroked his fur, her fingers tracing the contours of his powerful form, her touch a silent reassurance, a plea for him to hold on. Slowly, gradually, the trembling began to subside. The steaming of the poultice lessened, the silver crescent mark beneath it dimming, its unnatural glow fading. Reese's breathing became more even, his body less tense. He was still the wolf, but he was healing. Relief washed over her, a wave of exhaustion and gratitude. She had done it. She had saved him, at least for now. She leaned back against the wall, her body slumping with fatigue, her mind still racing with the events of the night. But her reprieve was short-lived. A sudden crash from downstairs shattered the quiet, a sound of splintering wood and breaking glass. Her heart leaped into her throat, her blood turning to ice. They were back. The hunters. She looked at Reese, at the wolf, his eyes now open, alert, his golden gaze fixed on the doorway. He was still weak, recovering, but he was ready to fight, to protect her. She rose, her legs shaky, her mind scrambling for a plan. She had to get him out of there, had to find a way to escape, to protect them both. But where could they go? The woods were crawling with hunters. The town was no longer safe. Her cottage was under siege. She heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate, the sound of boots on wood. They were coming. She grabbed her grandmother's walking stick, the sturdy piece of oak, her only weapon, her only defense. It was a pathetic weapon against hunters armed with silver, with guns, with the intent to kill. But it was all she had. The door to the bedroom burst open, splintering wood flying across the room. Two figures stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. They were men, large and imposing, dressed in dark clothing, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a cold, merciless determination. They were armed with rifles, the barrels gleaming with a deadly silver sheen. Hunters. Well. One of the men said, his voice a low, menacing growl. Look what we have here. The wolf and his whore. Evan felt a surge of anger, of defiance, coursing through her veins. She stepped in front of Reese, shielding him with her body, her grip tightening on the walking stick. Get out of my house, she said, her voice trembling but firm. The man chuckled, a cruel, humorless sound. Not a chance, old woman. We've been tracking this beast for weeks. And now we've found him. And his mate. The word mate was spat out with disgust, with contempt. Evan felt a flicker of fear, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective instinct, a primal urge to defend her bond. He's done nothing wrong, she said, her voice rising. He's not a monster. He's a werewolf, the other hunter said, his voice harsh and unforgiving. A creature of darkness. An abomination. He needs to be put down. Evan knew there was no reasoning with them, no pleading, no bargaining. They were driven by hate, by fear, by a blind adherence to an ancient, misguided code. Reese growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the room. He was still weak, recovering, but he was ready to fight, to defend her, even if it meant his own death. Stay back, Evan warned, raising the walking stick, her body trembling. I won't let you hurt him. The hunters laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. You? An old woman with a stick? You're no match for us. One of the hunters raised his rifle, aiming it directly at Reese. Evan knew she had to do something, had to act quickly, before it was too late. She lunged forward, swinging the walking stick with all her might, aiming for the hunter's head. It was a desperate move, a futile gesture of defiance, but it was all she had. The hunter, surprised by her sudden attack, stumbled back, the rifle firing harmlessly into the ceiling. The other hunter, enraged, raised his own rifle, aiming it at Evan. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the impact, for the pain, for the end. But the shot never came. Instead, there was a roar, a primal, earth-shattering roar that filled the room, that shook the very foundations of the house. Rhys. He had transformed, not fully, but partially, his body shifting, changing, his fangs bared, his claws extended, his golden eyes blazing with a furious, protective rage. He leaped, a blur of motion, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws. He attacked the hunter who had aimed at Evan, knocking him to the ground, his rifle flying across the room. The other hunter, momentarily stunned by the sudden, ferocious attack, hesitated, his aim wavering. It was all the time Evan needed. She grabbed the fallen rifle, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the unfamiliar weapon. She had never fired a gun before, never even held one, but she knew she had to do something, had to protect Rhys, had to protect them. She aimed the rifle at the hunter who was struggling with Rhys, her finger hovering over the trigger. She hesitated, her mind wrestling with the implications of what she was about to do, of taking a life, of becoming a killer. But then she looked at Rhys, at his golden eyes, at the bond that connected them, at the love and the fear and the determination that surged through her. She pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. Chapter 10. Secrets in the Candlelit Attic. The rifle's report echoed through the house, a deafening blast that seemed to hang in the air long after the sound itself had faded. The hunter who had been struggling with Rhys cried out, clutching his leg, his body collapsing to the floor. He writhed in pain, his face contorted in agony, his curses and threats muffled by the ringing in Avant's ears. She stood there, frozen, the rifle still clutched in her trembling hands, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling her nostrils. She had shot a man. She had taken aim and pulled the trigger, intending to harm, to maim, to kill. It was a horrifying realization, a moment that shattered her perception of herself, of her world, of her morality. Rhys, still in his partially transformed state, stood over the fallen hunter, his fangs bared, his claws extended, his golden eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and concern. He looked at Evan, his gaze searching hers, questioning, assessing. She lowered the rifle, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I had to, she whispered, her voice hoarse, her throat constricted with a mixture of fear and guilt. He who was going to kill you. Rhys nudged her gently with his snout, a gesture of reassurance, of understanding. He knew. He had seen the threat, the danger, the necessity of her action. The other hunter, the one who had first aimed at Rhys, was still on the floor, groaning, clutching his injured leg. He was disarmed, defeated, but still a threat. Evan looked at him, her gaze unwavering, her fear replaced by a cold, hard determination. She had crossed a line, stepped into a world of violence, of werewolves, of hunters, of ancient curses. There was no going back. Get out, she said, her voice low and steady, her tone surprisingly firm. Get out of my house, and never come back. If you ever come near us again, I won't hesitate. I'll kill you. The hunter stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain, fear, and respect. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as an old woman, a harmless bystander. He had learned a harsh lesson. He struggled to his feet, limping heavily, his injured leg leaving a trail of blood on the floor. He helped his companion, the one who was still groaning in pain, to his feet, and together they stumbled out of the room, out of the house, disappearing into the night. Evan watched them go, her body trembling, her mind reeling. She lowered the rifle, letting it fall to the floor with a clatter, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Rhys, still partially transformed, approached her, nuzzling her gently, his fur soft against her skin. He was comforting her, reassuring her, letting her know that she had done what was necessary, that she had protected them both. She leaned against him, her body shaking, her emotions raw and exposed. She buried her face in his fur, her tears flowing freely, a release of the tension, the fear, the guilt that had been building inside her. He licked her face, his tongue rough but gentle, a gesture of affection, of love. She felt the bond, strong and unwavering, a connection that transcended words, that transcended species, that transcended everything. After a while, her sobs subsided, her breathing becoming more even. She pulled away from him, looking into his golden eyes, her gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude, love, and uncertainty. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Where do we go?" Rhys, still partially transformed, couldn't answer her in words. But he nudged her towards the attic stairs, his golden eyes urging her forward, his intention clear. The attic. The secrets. The answers. She understood. She had found the remedy for the silver poison in her grandmother's attic, but she knew there was more, much more, hidden within those dusty boxes, those forgotten books, those secrets. She climbed the stairs, Rhys following close behind, his partially transformed body moving with surprising grace in the narrow space. The attic was, as she had left it, dimly lit, filled with the scent of aged wood and dried herbs, a repository of forgotten memories and hidden knowledge. She went back to the small, wooden box, the one she had found earlier, the one that contained the vials, the herbs, the leather-bound book. She opened it again, her hands trembling slightly, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She found another book, hidden beneath the first, its cover made of dark, worn leather, its title embossed in silver, a language she still didn't recognize, but which felt familiar. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages, the strange symbols, the cryptic diagrams, the faded illustrations. She found a passage, written in her grandmother's hand, in English, a passage that seemed to leap off the page, that resonated with a power that made her skin tingle. The bond of the blood moon, unbreakable, undeniable. A connection forged in destiny, a love that transcends time and space. But the curse, the shadow it seeks to destroy, to corrupt, to consume. Only the truth, revealed, can break the cycle, can heal the wound, can save them all. The truth. Revealed. It was the key to breaking the curse, to saving Rhys, to saving themselves. But what was the truth? What secrets did her grandmother hide? What had she done to set these events into motion? She continued to search, her fingers tracing the faded ink, her eyes scanning the cryptic words, her mind racing through the possibilities, through the fragments of knowledge she had gleaned. As her fingers brushed the pages of the second, older book, the pages suddenly illuminated with a cool, blue light. It was as if her touch activated some hidden magic. She realized with a start that the attic was not just a storage space.
It was a sanctuary.
A place of power. A place of answers. The air had grown heavy with anticipation. Chapter 11. The Price of a Forbidden Bond. The blue light emanating from the ancient book intensified, filling the attic with an ethereal glow. The strange symbols on the pages seemed to dance and shift, as if coming alive under Avant's touch. Rhys, still in his partially transformed state, whined softly, a sound of unease, of recognition. He seemed drawn to the book, yet also wary of it, his instinct sensing a power both alluring and dangerous. Evan continued to read, her grandmother's handwritten notes translating the cryptic text, revealing a story that was both terrifying and heartbreaking. It was the story of her lineage, of the women who had carried the mark of the wolf, of the soul bonds they had formed, of the curse that had haunted them for generations. The story began centuries ago, in a small village nestled in the heart of the Blackwood Forest. A young woman, Alara's ancestor, had fallen in love with a werewolf, a powerful, enigmatic creature who had captured her heart with his wild spirit and his undeniable charm. They had formed a soul bond, a connection that transcended the ordinary, a love that defied the laws of nature and the prejudices of their communities. But their love was forbidden, their bond a threat to the delicate balance between the human and werewolf worlds. The villagers, fearing the unknown, the supernatural, had hunted them, persecuted them, driven them into the depths of the forest. The werewolf, desperate to protect his mate, had made a pact with an ancient entity, a powerful force that dwelled within the heart of the forest, a being of shadow and darkness. The pact had granted him the power to protect his love, but it had come at a price. A curse. A shadow that would hang over his descendants, over the women who carried the mark of the wolf, over the soul bonds they would form. The curse would manifest in different ways, in different generations, but it would always be there, a constant threat, a darkness that sought to consume them all. Evan read on, her heart aching with the weight of her ancestors' tragedy, with the realization of the burden she now carried, the legacy of a forbidden love, of a desperate pact, of an ancient curse. She understood now the whispers, the dreams, the pull of the woods, the silver ring. It was all connected, all part of a story that had been unfolding for centuries, a story that was now reaching its climax, its reckoning. She learned that the blood moon was not just a catalyst, but a trigger, a moment when the veil between worlds was thinnest, when the curse was at its strongest, when the soul bonds were most vulnerable. She learned that the hunters were not just random fanatics, but descendants of the villagers who had persecuted her ancestors, driven by a misguided sense of duty, of vengeance. She learned that Reese was not just a werewolf, but the alpha of his pack, a descendant of the original werewolf who had made the pact, the one who carried the full weight of the curse, the one who was destined to either break it or be consumed by it. And she, Evan Corbin, the quiet bookseller, the grieving widow, was the key. She was the one who could help him break the curse, the one who could tip the balance between darkness and light, the one who could save them all. But the price was steep. The book revealed that to break the curse, she would have to sacrifice something precious, something dear, something that went to the very core of her being. She would have to give up her humanity. She would have to become a werewolf. The realization struck her like a physical blow, a wave of shock and disbelief that washed over her. To become a creature of the night, to embrace the wildness, the primal instincts, the otherness. It was a terrifying prospect, a transformation that went against everything she had ever known, everything she had ever believed. She looked at Reese, at his partially transformed state, at his golden eyes, at the bond that connected them. She saw the pain, the struggle, the vulnerability beneath the power, the wildness. She saw the love, the connection, the destiny that awaited them. She closed the book, her hands trembling, her mind reeling. She had a choice to make, a decision that would determine not only her own fate, but the fate of Reese, of his pack, of everyone. She could walk away, return to her old life, try to forget the whispers, the dreams, the bond, the curse. She could let Reese face his destiny alone, let the darkness consume him, let the hunters win. Or she could embrace the unknown, the terrifying, the wonderful. She could accept the bond, the love, the destiny that awaited her. She could become a werewolf, join Reese in his fight, help him break the curse, save them all. It was a choice between fear and love, between safety and sacrifice, between humanity and otherness. She looked at Reese, his golden eyes searching hers, questioning, waiting. He knew. He had sensed the revelation, the decision she had to make. He wouldn't force her, wouldn't pressure her. He would respect her choice, whatever it may be. But he needed her. His pack needed her. The world needed her. The attic was silent, filled only with the faint, rhythmic pulsing of the bond that connected them, with the weight of centuries of history, of love, of loss, of hope. The blue light from the book faded, the symbols returning to their dormant state, the secrets once again concealed within the ancient pages. Evan took a deep breath, her decision made. She looked at Reese, her gaze unwavering, her voice firm with a newfound resolve. "Tell me," she began, her voice catching. "Tell me how." He met her gaze, his eyes filled with something between pain and pride. Chapter 12. Fracture Reflections in Still Water. Rhys, still bearing the remnants of his partial transformation, shifted slightly, a low rumble vibrating from his chest. He couldn't speak in this form, but his golden eyes, filled with a complex mixture of emotions, conveyed more than words ever could. He was relieved, grateful, but also apprehensive, aware of the immense sacrifice she was contemplating. He nudged her gently towards a dusty, ornate mirror standing in the corner of the attic, its surface clouded with age, its silver frame tarnished and worn. It wasn't just a mirror, Evan sensed it immediately. It was a relic, an artifact, imbued with the same ancient magic that permeated the books, the box, the very air of the attic. She approached the mirror, her reflection wavering and indistinct in the clouded glass. She saw a woman on the cusp of change, a woman caught between two worlds, a woman facing a decision that would alter her life forever. She saw the fear, the uncertainty, but also the determination, the love, the resolve. Rhys, his movements surprisingly graceful despite his partially transformed state, picked up a small, silver vial from the box, one she hadn't noticed before. It contained a shimmering, opalescent liquid that seemed to glow with an inner light. He held it out to her, his golden eyes conveying a silent message. This is the way. This is the price. She understood. It was a potion, a catalyst, a trigger that would initiate the transformation, the irreversible change from human to werewolf. It was a gift, a burden, a choice. She took the vial, her fingers trembling as she held the cool glass. She looked at the shimmering liquid, at the magic it contained, at the future it represented. She thought of Thomas, her late husband, the gentle, steady love they had shared. A pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her. Was she betraying him by embracing this otherness? But she also thought of Rhys, of his golden eyes, of his strength and vulnerability, of the bond that connected them, of the love that was blossoming between them, a love that defied logic, that transcended species, that called to her. She looked back at the mirror, at her reflection, at the woman she was, at the woman she was about to become. She saw not a betrayal, but a continuation of her grandmother's legacy, of the lineage of strong, independent women who had carried the mark of the wolf, who had embraced their destiny, who had fought for love, for freedom, for survival. She uncorked the vial, the scent of the potion filling her nostrils, a strange, intoxicating aroma that was both floral and musky, both sweet and wild. It was a scent that spoke of ancient forests, of moonlit hunts, of a primal connection to nature, to the otherness. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze meeting Rhys's in the mirror, his golden eyes filled with a silent plea, a silent promise. He would be there for her, through the transformation, through the pain, through the change. He would guide her, protect her, love her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, her decision made. She tilted the vial to her lips, the shimmering liquid flowing into her mouth, a taste that was both bitter and sweet, both terrifying and exhilarating. The effect was immediate. A wave of heat surged through her body, a burning sensation that started in her core and spread outward, consuming her, transforming her. She gasped, dropping the vial, the glass shattering on the floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. She clutched at her chest, her heart pounding, her breathing ragged, her muscles spasming. She felt her bones shifting, her skin tingling, her senses heightening. She heard a ringing in her ears, a roaring in her head, a symphony of chaos and change. She looked at the mirror, at her reflection, at the woman who was disappearing, at the creature that was emerging. Her eyes were changing, shifting from hazel to gold, a luminous, molten gold that mirrored Rhys's. Her features were sharpening, her skin tightening, her hair thickening. She stumbled, falling to her knees, her body convulsing, her hands gripping the floor, her nails extending, sharpening, becoming claws. She cried out, a sound that was both human and animal, a sound of pain, of fear, of transformation. Reese, still partially transformed, rushed to her side, nuzzling her, licking her face, his golden eyes filled with concern, with love, with solidarity. He was there for her, grounding her, anchoring her, helping her through the agonizing process, the irreversible change. The attic was filled with the sounds of her transformation, with the groans, the whimpers, the cries, with the shifting of bones, the tearing of flesh, the emergence. It was a terrifying, awe-inspiring spectacle, a dance of creation and destruction, of death and rebirth. As the pain subsided and the transformation neared its completion, Evan looked once more into the clouded mirror. The woman she had been was gone, replaced by a creature of myth, of legend, of nightmare. A werewolf. She was no longer Evan the Corbin, the quiet bookseller, the grieving widow. She was something else. Something more. Something wild. She stood on all fours now. The fractured reflections were whole.
She was changed.
Chapter 13. The Howl of a Distant Storm. The transformation left Evan the disoriented, her senses overwhelmed by a cacophony of new stimuli. The attic, once dimly lit and dusty, now seemed vibrant, alive with a million subtle details she had never noticed before. The scent of aged wood, dried herbs, and Reese's musk were amplified, almost intoxicating. The faint sounds of the night outside, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of owls, the distant howl of a coyote, were crystal clear, sharp and distinct. She was on all fours, her body covered in thick, silver-gray fur, her paws pressing against the rough wooden floor. She felt different. Stronger, faster, more alive. But also alien. She looked at her paws, at the sharp claws that extended and retracted with a thought, at the unfamiliar texture of her fur. She was a creature of the night, a werewolf, a being she had only read about in books, in legends, in nightmares. Reese, now fully transformed, stood beside her, his massive form a comforting presence, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of relief, pride, and love. He nudged her gently with his snout, a silent reassurance, a welcome to the pack, to the otherness. She tried to stand, to walk on two legs, but her limbs felt awkward, unfamiliar, her balance unsteady. She stumbled, falling back onto all fours, a whimper escaping her throat. It was a frustrating, humbling experience to be reduced to this primal state, to have to relearn the basic mechanics of movement. Reese whined softly, his gaze encouraging, patient. He knew. He had been through this himself, centuries ago. He would guide her, teach her, help her adapt to her new form, to her new life. He lowered himself to the ground, demonstrating, his movements fluid and graceful, a masterclass in lupin locomotion. He walked, he trotted, he ran in a tight circle, his body a symphony of power and elegance. He was showing her, teaching her, without words, without judgment, without pressure. She watched him, her golden eyes mimicking his, her mind absorbing the lesson, her body slowly adapting, learning, remembering. She tried again, pushing herself up onto her hind legs, her balance still shaky, her movements tentative. She took a step, then another, her confidence growing with each stride. She walked, she trotted, she ran, her body slowly adjusting to her new form, her new senses, her new reality. It was exhilarating, freeing, a primal joy that surged through her veins, a connection to nature, to the wildness that she had never experienced before. She ran with Reese in the attic, a small, confined space that felt like a boundless expanse in her heightened state. They chased each other, playfully nipping, wrestling, their movements a dance of instinct and affection, a celebration of their bond, of their transformation. But the joy was short-lived. A sudden, sharp pain pierced through Evan's senses, a wave of fear and dread that washed over her, making her stumble, her legs giving way beneath her. It wasn't a physical pain, but something else. Something external. Reese felt it too. He stopped running, his body tensing, his golden eyes narrowing, his gaze fixed on the window, on the darkness outside. He growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the room. A warning, a threat. Something was wrong. Something was coming. The distant howl she had heard earlier, the one she had dismissed as a coyote, returned, closer now, louder, more menacing. It wasn't a coyote. It was a werewolf. But it wasn't Reese. It wasn't a member of his pack. It was an enemy. Reese barked sharply, a command, a warning. He nudged Evan towards the attic door, his intention clear. We need to leave.
Now.
She understood. She followed him, her body still adjusting to her new form, her movements still tentative, but her instincts sharp, her senses alert. They descended the stairs, their paws silent on the wood, their bodies low to the ground, their senses scanning for any sign of danger. They reached the living room, the fire in the hearth now reduced to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. The air was thick with tension, with the scent of fear and anticipation. Suddenly, a crash from outside, the sound of splintering wood, of shattering glass. They were under attack. Again. But this time, it wasn't the hunters. It was something else. Something worse. Reese positioned himself in front of Evan, shielding her with his body, his fangs bared, his golden eyes blazing with a furious, protective rage. He was ready to fight, to defend her, to protect his mate. The front door burst open, splintering wood flying across the room. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the night sky, a dark, imposing presence that radiated power and malice. It was a werewolf, but unlike any Evan had ever seen. Larger, more muscular, its fur a dark, almost black, its eyes glowing with a red, infernal light. It was a creature of nightmare, of pure, unadulterated evil. The werewolf snarled, a sound that was both terrifying and familiar. It was the howl she had heard earlier, the howl that had sent a wave of fear and dread through her. Reese the werewolf growled, its voice a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. You cannot hide. The curse will be fulfilled. The blood moon demands it. Evan felt a chill run down her spine, a primal fear that gripped her heart. This was the darkness Reese had spoken of, the shadow that had hung over his pack for generations, the entity that sought to consume them all. And it had come for them. The approaching storm seemed to mirror the turmoil, both outside the house and in Evan's own newly changed body. Chapter 14. A Trail of Scars and Starlight. The black-furred werewolf stepped into the cottage, its red eyes burning with malevolent intent. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, a palpable tension that made Evan's fur stand on end. She could feel the darkness radiating from the creature, a suffocating presence that threatened to overwhelm her.
Who are you?
Reese growled, his voice low and dangerous, his body tensed, ready to strike. He positioned himself protectively in front of Evan, shielding her from the intruder's gaze. The black werewolf chuckled, a cruel, humorless sound that echoed through the room.
You know who I am, Reese.
Or perhaps you've forgotten. The centuries have not been kind to your memory, have they? Reese narrowed his eyes, his golden gaze searching the intruder's face, trying to place the familiar voice, the familiar scent. Recognition dawned, a flicker of shock and disbelief crossing his features. Kaelin, Reese whispered, the name a curse, a betrayal, a memory of a past he had tried to bury. Indeed, Kaelin said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Your old friend. Your brother. Brother. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning, with the implication of a bond broken, of a trust betrayed, of a rivalry that had spanned centuries. Evan, still new to her werewolf form, struggled to understand the implications, the history, the baggage. But she could feel the tension, the animosity, the hatred that flowed between Reese and Kaelin, a palpable force that threatened to consume them all. What do you want, Kaelin? Reese asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. What do I want? Kaelin repeated, his red eyes gleaming.
I want what is rightfully mine.
The power.
The pack. The mate.
His gaze shifted to Evan, his red eyes lingering on her, assessing her, claiming her. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a primal fear that made her want to shrink away, to hide. But she stood her ground, her loyalty to Rhys, her commitment to the bond, overriding her fear. "She is mine, Kaelin," Rhys growled, his voice a warning, a threat. "You will not touch her." Kaelin laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "The blood moon chose her, Rhys.
Not you.
She is the key to breaking the curse or fulfilling it. And I intend to be the one who wields that key." He lunged, a blur of motion, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws. Rhys met his attack, the two werewolves colliding with a ferocious impact, their bodies a tangle of muscle and rage. Evan watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest, her instinct screaming at her to run, to hide. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. She was Rhys's mate, bound to him by a force she was only beginning to understand. She had to fight, to help him, to survive. She circled the battling werewolves, her senses heightened, her mind racing. She was still new to her form, still learning to control her instincts, her strength, her power. But she had to find a way to help Rhys, to tip the balance in his favor. She noticed a detail, a subtle difference between Rhys and Kaelin. Kaelin, despite his size and power, bore scars, old wounds that had never fully healed, marks of battles fought and lost. They were weaknesses, vulnerabilities that she could exploit. She waited for her opportunity, her eyes fixed on the swirling melee, her body tense, ready to strike. She saw Kaelin momentarily gain the upper hand, pinning Rhys to the ground, his fangs bared, ready to deliver a killing blow. It was now or never. She lunged, her own fangs bared, her claws extended. She attacked Kaelin from the side, aiming for one of his scarred flanks, a weak spot she had identified. Her attack was clumsy, inexperienced, but it was enough. Kaelin, surprised by her sudden intervention, yelped in pain, his grip on Rhys loosening. Rhys seized the opportunity, throwing Kaelin off him, regaining his footing. The battle continued, a ferocious dance of teeth and claws, of growls and snarls, of power and rage. Evan, despite her inexperience, fought bravely, using her speed and agility to harass Kaelin, to distract him, to give Rhys an advantage. But Kaelin was stronger, more experienced, more ruthless. He landed a blow on Evan, sending her sprawling across the room, her body hitting the wall with a sickening thud. She lay there, dazed, her vision blurred, her body aching. She had failed. She had been too weak, too inexperienced, too human. She saw Kaelin turn his attention back to Rhys, his red eyes gleaming with triumph, his fangs bared, ready to finish him off. She had to do something. She had to save him. She closed her eyes, focusing all her energy, all her will, on the bond, on the connection she shared with Rhys. She whispered his name, over and over again, a mantra of love and desperation. Rhys, 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 she felt it then, a surge of power, a raw, primal energy that flowed through her, filling her with a strength she didn't know she possessed. It was the bond, amplified, strengthened by her desperation, by her love, by her wolf. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Kaelin, on the creature who threatened to destroy everything she held dear. She rose to her feet, her body trembling, her fur bristling, her golden eyes blazing with a newfound fury, a newfound power. She let out a howl, a sound that was both terrifying and beautiful, a sound that echoed through the cottage, through the forest, through the night. It was a howl of defiance, of challenge, of transformation. It was the howl of a wolf, fully awakened. It was a howl that caused Kaelin to freeze, to stop. He had heard that howl before. He had feared that howl before. Chapter 15. The Pact of Blood and Bone. Kaelin froze, his red eyes widening in disbelief, his body trembling slightly. Ivan's howl, raw and powerful, reverberated through the cottage, a sound that spoke of ancient magic, of primal fury, of a bond unbroken, unbreakable. It was a sound that struck fear into his heart, a sound that reminded him of his past failures, of his curse. Rhys, momentarily stunned by Avant's transformation, by the sheer power of her howl, used the opportunity to regain his footing, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pride, awe, and love. He saw the change in her, the confidence, the strength, the wolf. She was no longer the hesitant, uncertain newcomer. She was his mate, his equal, his partner. Impossible, Kaelin whispered, his voice a mixture of fear and rage. You are weak. Human. Evan stepped forward, her body radiating power, her golden eyes fixed on Kaelin, her fangs bared in a silent threat. She was no longer afraid. She had embraced her wolf, her destiny, her bond. I am Evan the Corbin, she growled, her voice low and dangerous, a sound that sent shivers down Kaelin's spine. And I am his mate. You will not touch him. You will not touch us. Kaelin snarled, his red eyes blazing with fury. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as a weak, insignificant human. He had made a grave mistake. The blood moon empowers me, she wolf, Kaelin spat. You cannot defeat me. Perhaps not, Evan said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. But we can. She nodded to Rhys, a silent communication, a pact of blood and bone, a union of two souls, two wolves, bound by a love that transcended time, that transcended everything. They attacked together, a coordinated assault, a symphony of teeth and claws, of power and grace. Rhys, rejuvenated by Avant's transformation, by the strength of their bond, fought with a renewed ferocity, his movements fluid and precise, his attacks relentless. Evan, embracing her newfound strength, her primal instincts, fought with a courage and a skill that surprised even herself. Kaelin, despite his size and power, was overwhelmed. He had expected to face Rhys alone, weakened and vulnerable. He had not anticipated Avant's transformation, her strength, her bond. They drove him back, forcing him towards the shattered front door, towards the darkness outside. He was wounded, bleeding, his red eyes filled with a mixture of rage and fear. This is not over, Kaelin snarled, his voice hoarse, his body trembling. The curse will be fulfilled. The blood moon demands it. He retreated, disappearing into the night, his howls echoing through the forest, a promise of vengeance, a threat of return. Evan and Rhys stood together, their bodies bruised and battered, their fur matted with sweat and blood, but their bond unbroken, their love unyielding. They had won.
For now.
They nuzzled each other, their golden eyes meeting, their hearts beating in unison, a silent communication of gratitude, of relief, of love. They were exhausted, drained, but also exhilarated. They had faced the darkness, the curse, the enemy. And they had survived. They looked around the damaged cottage, at the splintered wood, the shattered glass, the remnants of the battle. It was a mess, a destruction, but it was also home. They had defended it, protected it, together. Rhys, still in his wolf form, nudged Evan towards the stairs, towards the attic, towards the secrets. He knew. He sensed that there was more to learn, more to understand, more to uncover. They climbed the stairs, their paws silent on the wood, their bodies weary, but their spirits hopeful. The attic was, as they had left it, dimly lit, filled with the scent of aged wood and dried herbs, a repository of forgotten memories and hidden knowledge. But the atmosphere was different. The blue light, which had illuminated the ancient book earlier, was gone, replaced by a soft, warm glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the attic. They found a scroll, tucked away in a corner, hidden beneath a pile of dusty books. It was old, fragile, its parchment yellowed and brittle, its ink faded and blurred. But it was there. A message. A clue. A hope. Evan, still in her wolf form, nudged the scroll with her snout, her instincts telling her that it was important, that it held a key, a secret. She used her claws, carefully, gently, to unroll the scroll, revealing its contents. It was a map, a detailed drawing of the Blackwood Forest marked with strange symbols, with cryptic annotations, with locations. One location was circled in red ink, a small, almost imperceptible, in the heart of the forest. Beneath the circle, a single word was written, in her grandmother's hand, in English. Sanctuary. Sanctuary. The word resonated with Evan, with Rhys, with the bond that connected them. It was a place of safety, of refuge, of power. It was a place where they could hide, where they could heal, where they could plan. They knew where they had to go. They memorized the map, the symbols, the location, their wolf minds absorbing the information, etching it into their memories. Then, they destroyed the scroll, burning it in the hearth downstairs, ensuring that its secrets would remain safe. Before the fire died down, Evan gazed into the burning parchment. She glimpsed, for only a second, a fleeting face in the flame. Her grandmother? Chapter 16. Whispers of Treachery and Truth. The journey to the sanctuary was arduous, a trek through the darkest, most treacherous parts of Blackwood Forest. Evan, still adjusting to her wolf form, struggled to keep pace with Rhys, her movements less sure, her stamina less developed. But she persevered, driven by the need for safety, by the hope of finding answers, by the bond that connected her to her mate. Rhys, ever patient, ever protective, slowed his pace, guiding her, encouraging her, his golden eyes filled with a constant reassurance, a silent promise of support. He led her along hidden paths, through tangled undergrowth, across rushing streams, his senses alert to any sign of danger, any hint of pursuit. The forest, under the cloak of night, was a different world, a realm of shadows and whispers, of unseen creatures and hidden dangers. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl, sent shivers down Avant's spine, her newly heightened senses amplifying her fear, her vulnerability. But she also felt a strange sense of belonging. She was a part of this world now, a creature of the night, a wolf, connected to the primal forces of nature, to the ancient magic that pulsed through the forest. She felt the earth beneath her paws, the wind in her fur, the scent of pine and Rhys. It was terrifying, exhilarating, a visceral experience that stripped away all pretense, all artifice, leaving only the raw, elemental truth. As they traveled, Rhys communicated with her, not through words, but through gestures, through nudges, through glances, through the silent language of the pack, of the bond. He taught her to hunt, to track, to use her senses, to trust her instincts, to survive. She learned quickly, her wolf nature adapting, evolving, her human memories fading, blending with her primal awareness. She felt a growing connection to Rhys, to his pack, to the ancient lineage she now shared, to the destiny that awaited them. But the journey was not without its challenges. They encountered signs of Kaelin's presence, tracks, scents, the lingering residue of his dark magic, a constant reminder of the threat that still loomed, of the vengeance that he had promised. They also encountered other creatures of the night, other werewolves, members of Rhys's pack, who had been searching for them, worried, concerned, but also loyal. They were welcomed, embraced, accepted into the fold, their bond with Rhys solidifying their place within the pack, their commitment to the fight against the curse, against Kaelin. During a brief respite, huddled together for warmth and safety in a hidden cave, Rhys finally spoke, his voice low and rough, a sound that sent shivers of pleasure down Avant's spine, even in her wolf form. He had shifted back, partially, enough to communicate, his eyes still golden, his features still bearing traces of his lupin nature. "We are close," he said, his hand stroking Avant's fur, his touch a comfort, a reassurance. "The sanctuary is near. But it is guarded, protected by ancient magic, by secrets." Evan, unable to speak in her wolf form, nudged him gently with her snout, her golden eyes questioning, seeking answers. Rhys explained, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He told her about the sanctuary, a place of power, a refuge created centuries ago by his ancestors, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the ancient magic of the forest was concentrated, amplified. He told her that the sanctuary held the key to breaking the curse, to defeating Kaelin, to saving them all. But it also held dangers, secrets, trials that they would have to face, challenges that would test their strength, their loyalty, their bond. He also revealed a truth, a secret that he had kept hidden, a burden he had carried alone for centuries. He told her about Kaelin, about their shared past, about the betrayal that had led to the curse, to the rift. "Kaelin and we were brothers," Rhys said, his voice heavy with regret, with pain. "Not by blood, but by bond. We were raised together, trained together, fought together. We were inseparable, closer than kin. We were meant to lead the pack together, to protect our kind, to uphold the ancient laws." But Kaelin had been seduced by power, by darkness, by the promise of control. He had sought to usurp Rhys's position as alpha, to claim the power of the blood moon for himself, to break the ancient pact. He had betrayed Rhys, his pack, his heritage. He had allied himself with the ancient entity, the being of shadow and darkness that dwelled within the heart of the forest, the source of the curse. He had become corrupted. The betrayal had led to a battle, a conflict that had scarred the pack, that had weakened them, that had left Rhys with the burden of leadership, of responsibility. And now, Kaelin had returned, seeking vengeance, seeking power, seeking Evenna. Evenna, listening to Rhys's story, felt a surge of anger, of protectiveness, towards her mate. She understood now the depth of Kaelin's betrayal, the extent of his malice, the threat he posed. She nuzzled Rhys, her fur brushing against his skin, her golden eyes conveying her unwavering support, her loyalty, her love. She would stand by him, fight by him, help him defeat Kaelin, break the curse, save them all. They continued their journey, their hearts heavy with the weight of Rhys's revelation, but their resolve strengthened, their bond deepened. The sanctuary awaited, and with it the truth. Chapter 17. The Cathedral of Lost Souls. The sanctuary wasn't what Evenna expected. She had imagined a hidden glade, a secluded cave, a place of natural beauty and tranquility. Instead, they arrived at a ruin, a crumbling stone structure swallowed by the forest, its walls overgrown with ivy, its roof open to the sky, its windows gaping like empty sockets. It was a cathedral, once grand and imposing, now a testament to time and decay, a monument to a forgotten faith, a lost world. The air around the cathedral was thick with magic, a palpable energy that made Avance fur bristle, her senses overload. She could feel the ancient power that permeated the stones, the whispers of the past, the echoes of prayers, of rituals, of secrets. It was a place of both beauty and sorrow, of hope and despair. Rhys, in his wolf form, led her cautiously towards the entrance, a gaping archway that had once held massive wooden doors, now long gone, reduced to dust and splinters. He was wary, alert, his senses scanning for any sign of danger, any hint of traps. They stepped inside, their paws silent on the stone floor, their bodies low to the ground, their eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered through the shattered windows and the open roof. The interior was vast and echoing, the nave stretching before them, lined with crumbling pillars, the altar a broken heap of stone, the stained glass windows shattered fragments of color, scattered like jewels on the floor. It was a cathedral of lost souls, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the spirits of the past lingered, where the ancient magic of the forest was concentrated, amplified. It was a place of power, but also of danger. Evenna could feel the presence of others. Not living beings, but spirits, entities, echoes of the past. They were not hostile, not threatening, but watchful. They were the guardians of the sanctuary, the protectors of its secrets, the witnesses of its history. Rhys led her through the nave, towards the altar, his movements slow and deliberate, his senses alert to any shift in the energy, any sign of disturbance. He was searching for something, a clue, a trigger, a key. He stopped before the broken altar, his golden eyes fixed on a particular spot, a section of the stone floor that was slightly raised, marked with strange symbols, with cryptic inscriptions, with bloodstains. It was a ritual site, a place where sacrifices had been made, where pacts had been forged, where the curse had been activated. Rhys nudged Evan, his gaze conveying a message. This is it. This is where we find the answers. This is where we break the curse. Evan understood. She felt a surge of anticipation, of fear, of hope. She was ready. Rhys began to circle the ritual site, his movements slow and deliberate, his golden eyes scanning the symbols, the inscriptions, the bloodstains. He was searching for a pattern, a sequence, a trigger. He stopped, his gaze fixed on a particular symbol, a crescent moon, a mirror image of the mark on his shoulder, the mark on Avant's ring. He nudged Evan, his gaze conveying a message. This is it.
The key.
Evan understood. She approached the symbol, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses heightened, her body trembling. She placed her paw on the crescent moon, her claws extending slightly, pressing into the stone. The effect was immediate. The air around them crackled with energy. The symbols on the floor began to glow with a blue light. The whispers of the past intensified, the spirits of the sanctuary swirling around them, their forms becoming more visible, more real. A voice echoed through the cathedral, a voice that was both ancient and familiar. It was the voice of her grandmother, Alara, the voice she had glimpsed in the burning parchment, the voice that had guided her, protected her, led her to this moment. Evan, the voice said, its tone both gentle and urgent. You have come. You have found the sanctuary. You are ready. Evan, still in her wolf form, whimpered softly, her golden eyes filled with a mixture of awe, fear, and recognition. The curse, it can be broken, Alara's voice continued. But it requires a sacrifice. A sacrifice of blood, of bone, of soul. Evan felt a chill run down her spine, a primal fear that gripped her heart. She knew. She had always known. There would be a price. A terrible price. Kalen, he seeks to control the curse, Alara's voice said. To use it for his own selfish purposes. To destroy the balance. To unleash the darkness. To rule. You must stop him, the voice pleaded. You are the only one who can. You are the key. You are the chosen. Evan felt the weight of the responsibility, the burden of her destiny, pressing down on her. She was no longer just a woman, a wolf, a mate. She was a warrior, a protector, a savior. The ritual, it must be performed, Alara's voice said. Under the blood moon. At the altar. With the blood of the bonded. With the bone of the ancient. With the soul of the willing. Evan understood. She knew what she had to do. The blood of the bonded. Hers and Rhys's. The bone of the ancient. A relic, an artifact, hidden within the sanctuary. The soul of the willing. That was the question. That was the sacrifice. That was the price. The blue light faded, the voice of Alara fading with it, the spirits of the sanctuary retreating, their forms becoming less visible, less real. Rhys nudged Evan, his golden eyes filled with a question, a silent plea for answers. She could not answer. She did not know the answer.
Yet.
The cathedral had presented more questions than answers. Chapter 18. A cage of moonlight and lies. The silence in the cathedral was heavy, broken only by the faint whispers of the spirits and the rhythmic breathing of Evan and Rhys. The weight of Alara's words, the revelation of the ritual, the looming sacrifice, pressed down on them, a tangible burden that threatened to crush their hope, their resolve. Rhys, still in his wolf form, circled the altar, his golden eyes searching, probing, seeking answers in the ancient stones, in the faded symbols, in the bloodstains. He was frustrated, impatient, his instincts screaming at him to act, to fight, to protect. But he knew. He sensed that this was not a battle to be won with teeth and claws, but with knowledge, with understanding, with sacrifice. Evan, equally frustrated, equally burdened, paced restlessly, her wolf mind struggling to reconcile the conflicting emotions, the fear, the determination, the love. She knew what was required of them, of her, but the final piece of the puzzle, the soul of the willing, remained elusive, a terrifying unknown that cast a shadow over their future. Suddenly, a sound from outside, a howl, sharp and piercing, shattered the silence. It was Kalen. He had found them. Rhys stiffened, his body tensing, his golden eyes narrowing, his gaze fixed on the entrance of the cathedral. He growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the room, a warning, a challenge. Evan felt a surge of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard determination. She would not run. She would not hide. She would face Kalen, fight him, protect Rhys, protect the sanctuary. Kalen appeared in the archway, his black fur contrasting sharply with the crumbling stone, his red eyes blazing with malevolent intent. He was alone, which was surprising, but it did not lessen the threat he posed. He was powerful, ruthless, driven by a desire for vengeance, for control, for Evan. "You cannot escape me, Rhys," Kalen growled, his voice echoing through the cathedral. "The blood moon rises. The ritual will be performed, and I will be the one to claim its power." Rhys stepped forward, shielding Evan with his body, his golden eyes locked on Kalen, his fangs bared in a silent threat. "You will not touch her," Kalen, Rhys said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will not touch the sanctuary." Kalen chuckled, a cruel, humorless sound. "You cannot stop me, brother. You are weak. You are bound by sentiment, by love. I am free. I am powerful." He lunged, a blur of motion, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws. Rhys met his attack, the two werewolves colliding with a ferocious impact, their bodies a tangle of muscle and rage. Evan watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her instinct screaming at her to join the fight, to help Rhys. But she knew. She sensed that this was not her battle. Not yet. Her role was different. Her sacrifice was different. She focused on the altar, on the symbols, on the bloodstains, on the ritual. She had to find the bone of the ancient, the relic, the artifact that was needed to complete the ritual, to break the curse, to defeat Kalen. She circled the altar, her golden eyes scanning the stones, her senses searching for any clue, any hint, any sign. She felt a faint tingling sensation, a subtle pull, a connection. She stopped, her gaze fixed on a particular spot, a section of the altar that was slightly recessed, hidden beneath a layer of dust and debris. She nudged the debris aside with her snout, revealing a small, wooden box, intricately carved with symbols that mirrored the ones on the floor, the ones on her ring, the ones everywhere. It was the box. The bone of the ancient. She opened it, her claws carefully lifting the lid, revealing its contents. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single bone, a small, delicate bone that shimmered with an unnatural, ethereal light. It was a finger bone, a human finger bone, adorned with a silver ring, a ring that was identical to Avant's, Alara's. The realization struck Evan with the force of a physical blow. The bone of the ancient was not just a relic, an artifact. It was a part of her grandmother, a part of her lineage, a part of her destiny. And the soul of the willing, it was Alara. Alara had sacrificed herself, her soul, to protect the sanctuary, to empower the ritual, to give them a chance to break the curse, to defeat Kalen. Evan felt a wave of grief, of loss, of gratitude. Her grandmother had loved her, protected her, even in death. She had given her the ultimate gift, the ultimate sacrifice. But there was no time for grief, no time for mourning. Kalen was still battling Rhys, their fight growing more intense, more desperate, more deadly. She had to act. She had to perform the ritual. She had to end this. As the fight continued, Kalen began to trap Rhys, pinning him, with nowhere to go. Kalen laughed cruelly and said, "It's over, Rhys. I win." But he was wrong. From the shadows, Evan howled. A howl of completion. A howl of rage. She held the box aloft, the bone within it glowing with a blinding light, the symbols on the altar responding, illuminating the cathedral with an ethereal glow. "Kalen, She roared, and this time, she was fully in control. "It is I who will perform the ritual." Kalen froze. His plan, his triumph, his scheme had had a fatal flaw. He had needed Eventha for the blood bond. He had thought he was in charge. He had been a fool. Evant's eyes blazed with ancient knowledge. This was her ritual. With the bone in her grasp and a furious prayer to her grandmother, she began. Chapter 19. The Reckoning of Heart and Heritage. The cathedral pulsed with power, the ancient stones vibrating with the force of the awakened magic. The symbols on the altar blazed with an incandescent light, illuminating the battling werewolves, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. Eventha, standing before the altar, the bone of Alara clutched in her paw, was a figure of both power and vulnerability, a conduit for the ancient forces, a sacrifice. Kalen, momentarily stunned by Evant's declaration, by the surge of power that emanated from her, from the bone, from the ritual, released his hold on Rhys, his red eyes widening in disbelief, in fear. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as a pawn, a tool to be used, discarded. He had not anticipated her strength, her resolve, her connection to the past. Rhys, seizing the opportunity, scrambled to his feet, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe. He saw the change in Eventha, the power that radiated from her, the ancient knowledge that blazed in her eyes. She was no longer just his mate, his partner. She was a priestess, a warrior, a savior. "You cannot control it, she-wolf." Kalen roared, his voice filled with rage and desperation. "The power, it will consume you." Eventha ignored him, her focus solely on the ritual, on the ancient words that flowed from her lips, words she didn't understand, but which her wolf mind, her ancient lineage, her bond with Alara, recognized, embraced. She raised the bone, the silver ring on its skeletal finger catching the light, reflecting the symbols on the altar, creating a kaleidoscope of shimmering patterns that danced across the walls of the cathedral. She chanted, her voice echoing through the ancient space, a melody of power and sorrow, of hope and sacrifice. She felt the connection to Alara, to her ancestors, to the lineage of strong, independent women who had carried the mark of the wolf, who had fought for love, for freedom, for survival. She felt the power surge through her, a raw, primal energy that both terrified and exhilarated her. She was a conduit, a vessel, a sacrifice. Kalen, realizing that he was losing control, that Eventha was about to succeed, lunged towards her, his fangs bared, his claws extended, his red eyes blazing with a desperate, furious rage. But Rhys intercepted him, his body a shield, his golden eyes filled with a fierce, protective determination. He would not let Kalen reach Eventha, would not let him disrupt the ritual, would not let him win. They clashed again, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws, their battle a desperate struggle for dominance, for survival, for the future. Eventha continued the ritual, her voice unwavering, her focus absolute. She felt the power building, the energy coalescing, the moment of reckoning approaching. She placed the bone on the altar, on the central symbol, the crescent moon that mirrored the mark on her ring, the mark on Rhys's shoulder, the mark of their bond. The cathedral shook, the stones groaning under the strain of the unleashed magic. The symbols on the altar blazed with an unbearable light, the air crackled with energy, the spirits of the sanctuary swirling around them, their forms becoming more visible, more real. A beam of moonlight, piercing through the shattered roof of the cathedral, illuminated the altar, bathing Eventha in its ethereal glow. It was the blood moon, at its zenith, its power amplified by the sanctuary, by the ritual, by the sacrifice. Eventha felt a surge of pain, a searing agony that ripped through her body, as the curse, the darkness that had haunted her lineage for centuries, began to unravel. She cried out, a sound of both suffering and triumph. Kalen, witnessing the power of the ritual, the unraveling of the curse, screamed in rage and frustration, his body convulsing, his form flickering, his red eyes dimming. He was losing. He was failing. Rhys, sensing Kaelin's weakening, seized the opportunity, delivering a final, devastating blow, sending Kaelin sprawling across the floor, defeated, broken, his power gone. The light subsided, the symbols on the altar dimming, the spirits of the sanctuary retreating, the cathedral falling silent. Once more, Evan, exhausted, drained, but also free, collapsed to her knees, her body trembling, her fur matted with sweat and blood. She had done it. She had broken the curse. She had saved Rhys, his pack, herself, and the town. Rhys, his own wounds forgotten, rushed to her side, nuzzling her gently, licking her face, his golden eyes filled with love, with gratitude, with relief. Kaelin lay on the floor, his body still, his red eyes extinguished, his form human. The curse was broken. The darkness was gone. But the victory had come at a price. Evan looked at the bone on the altar, at the silver ring that still adorned its skeletal finger. Alara's sacrifice. Her own transformation. She had broken the curse, but she had also changed, irrevocably. She was a werewolf, fully, completely. She had embraced her destiny, her heritage, her bond. She was no longer Evan the Corbin, the quiet bookseller, the grieving widow. She was something more, something powerful. She looked at Rhys, his golden eyes meeting hers, their bond stronger than ever, their love unyielding. They had faced the darkness, the curse, the enemy. And they had won. Together. She was ready for the new life. Ready to face the consequences. Ready to be his. Rhys shifted to his human form. Naked and raw, he kneeled before Evan, also fully human. He kissed her. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The kiss was a culmination of everything they had endured, a testament to their unbreakable bond, a promise of a future finally free from the shadows of the past. It was a kiss of relief, of gratitude, of a love that had been tested and proven true. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, their commitment, their transformation. Evan, now fully human again, but forever changed, returned the kiss with equal fervor, her body molding against Rhys's, her heart beating in time with his. She felt the warmth of his skin, the strength of his arms, the love in his touch. She was home. She was complete. The cathedral, silent and still, bore witness to their reunion, the ancient stones echoing with the whispers of the past, the spirits of the sanctuary watching over them, their presence a blessing, a benediction. They held each other, their bodies trembling, their emotions raw and exposed. They had survived. They had triumphed. But the scars of the battle, both physical and emotional, remained, reminders of the price they had paid, of the sacrifices they had made, of the journey they had undertaken. "It's over," Evan whispered, her voice hoarse, her throat constricted with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "The curse, it's broken." Rhys nodded, his golden eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You did it. You saved us all." He gently stroked her hair, his fingers tracing the contours of her face, his touch a reassurance, a comfort, a promise. They remained there, in the heart of the sanctuary, for a long time, lost in each other's embrace, drawing strength from their bond, from their love, from their shared destiny. Eventually, they rose, their bodies stiff and sore, their wounds still aching, but their spirits renewed. They had a future to face, a life to build, a pack to lead. They left the cathedral, hand in hand, stepping out into the dawn, the blood moon now a pale, fading memory in the sky, replaced by the soft, warm glow of the rising sun. The forest, no longer a place of fear and darkness, seemed to welcome them, its trees swaying gently in the breeze, its creatures singing a song of hope. They returned to the cottage, to the remnants of their old life, to the place where their journey had begun. It was damaged, scarred, but it was still home. They would rebuild it, together, stronger, more resilient, more united. They gathered the scattered remains of their belongings, the books, the photographs, the memories that had survived the battle. They would salvage what they could, create new memories, build a new future. They informed Sheriff Brody of the events, carefully omitting the supernatural details, attributing the damage to a violent storm, to a break-in. He was suspicious, skeptical, but he had no proof, no evidence to contradict their story. He accepted their explanation, reluctantly, his gaze lingering on them, his instincts telling him that there was more to the story, much more than they were revealing. But it was all he could do. The town of Blackwood Creek slowly returned to normal, the whispers of strange occurrences fading, the unease dissipating, the fear receding. But Evanna and Reese knew that the world was not as it seemed, that beneath the surface of the ordinary lay a realm of magic, of werewolves, of ancient curses, of hidden truths. They embraced their new life, their new roles, their new responsibilities. They led the pack, protecting their kind, upholding the ancient laws, maintaining the balance between the human and werewolf worlds. Evanna, no longer the quiet bookseller, became a leader, a warrior, a matriarch. She used her knowledge, her experience, her bond with Reese, to guide the pack, to protect them, to ensure their survival. She also reopened the bookstore, Bound Pages, transforming it into a haven, a gathering place, a symbol of hope and resilience. It was a place where humans and werewolves could coexist, where stories could be shared, where knowledge could be preserved. She and Reese, bound by love, by destiny, by the blood moon, lived a life of purpose, of passion, of transformation. They had faced the darkness, the curse, the enemy, and they had won, together. But their story was not over. It was just beginning. The world was full of magic, of wonder, of possibilities. And they were ready to embrace it, to explore it, to live it. Their final act, together, before the close of the day, was a simple one. Evanna buried her grandmother's bone, with the ring still attached, near the rebuilt porch of their home. They stood above the small grave. He held her, and she knew they would be okay. They had each other. Epilogue. Years passed, seasons changed, and the scars of Blackwood Creek, both visible and hidden, slowly faded. The rebuilt cottage, nestled amidst the towering pines, stood as a testament to resilience, to love, to the enduring power of a bond forged under a blood moon. Bound Pages, the bookstore, thrived, its shelves overflowing with stories, its atmosphere a blend of old-world charm and a subtle, almost imperceptible magic. Evanna and Reese, their hair now more silver than auburn or black, their faces etched with the lines of time and experience, remained the heart of the pack, their love a beacon, their wisdom a guiding force. They had navigated the complexities of their intertwined worlds, maintaining a delicate balance between the human and the supernatural, protecting their kind, upholding the ancient laws, ensuring the peace. They had children, born under various moons, some carrying the mark of the wolf, others seemingly untouched by the ancient lineage. Each child was cherished, taught the ways of the pack, the importance of balance, the power of love. The children knew of their grandmother, in hushed and revered tones. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned golden and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and pine, Evanna and Reese sat on the porch swing of their cottage, their hands intertwined, their bodies close, their hearts content. The moon, a sliver of silver in the darkening sky, cast a soft glow over the forest, illuminating the path that led to the sanctuary, to the cathedral of lost souls, to the place where their lives had been forever changed. A young girl, their granddaughter, Alara, named after the woman whose sacrifice had saved them all, ran towards them, her laughter echoing through the twilight. She carried a book in her hands, a worn, leather-bound volume that had once belonged to Avant's grandmother, a book filled with stories, with secrets, with magic. "Grandmama," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Tell me the story again. The story of the blood moon. The story of the wolf. The story of you." Evanna smiled, her gaze meeting Reese's, their eyes reflecting a shared history, a shared love, a shared destiny. "It's a long story, little one," Evanna said, her voice soft and warm, her hand gently stroking Alara's hair. but it's a good story. A story of courage, of sacrifice, of transformation. She began to tell the story, her voice weaving a tapestry of ancient lore and personal experience, of whispers and howls, of shadows and light. She told of the blood moon, of the awakening, of the bond, of the curse, of the battle, of the victory. She told of the woman she had been, the quiet bookseller, the grieving widow, the ordinary human. And she told of the woman she had become, the werewolf, the leader, the mate. She told of the love that had saved them, the bond that had united them, the destiny that had transformed them. As she spoke, the moon climbed higher in the sky, its silver light bathing the forest in an ethereal glow. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the echoes of the past, the whispers of the ancestors, the promise of the future. And in the heart of Blackwood Creek, under the watchful gaze of the moon, the story of Evanne and Rhys, the story of the moonbound fate, lived on, a legend whispered from generation to generation, a testament to the enduring power of love, of courage, of transformation. The stars were bright that night, and a single wolf howled in the distance. It was a song of peace, of belonging, of home.